Okay, our next speaker is Kelly Simpson from the Faculty of Education, and Kelly's going to tell us about her research in Whose Needs Are We Meeting? Accelerated ITE and Early Childhood Education in Australia.
Thank you for introducing me. So my research specifically focuses around exactly this intersection, I suppose, accelerated initial teacher education and early childhood education and care in Australia. There you go. So the education sector is really complex. How we teach, who we teach, and what we teach changes over time and quite consistently. So it's influenced by societal, community, political and economic priorities and policies, and the changes in those priorities and policies over time as well. Within that, our role as teachers, whether that's known or assumed, is also changing. So we're meeting a need through the way we teach, what we teach, with who we're teaching at the time. Sometimes education and its delivery is really reflexive, sometimes it's very reactive, and in the case of areas such as technology, the way that we can look at it is really just as continuously developing. It's always changing, it's always working to what we can now do as such. So as I said, in this particular session in my study, I'm looking at the intersection of two areas of education and the complexities and the tensions that are created within that intersection. Now, what I'm considering then is the needs that are, can be, or could be met when we accelerate initial teacher education programs to qualify teachers of the youngest people in Australia's education system. So that's children that are attending early childhood education and care services within that context. And there's a scarcity of research on initial teacher education for early childhood education overall. It's an under-researched area. There's even less research on what quality in initial teacher education programs for early childhood education and care look like, and research on the development, design and delivery, as well as the outcomes of accelerated initial teacher education programs for early childhood education and care in Australia is largely absent. There really isn't any research at this point. So this presentation and my research in general really draws together what we know about initial teacher education more broadly and what we know about early childhood education and care itself. To ask a question that we don't yet fully understand and we definitely don't have an answer to, and that is, whose needs are we meeting through initial teacher education programs that are accelerated for early years education, and how can these programs meet those needs best? So in the session and in my study, I consider how accelerated ITE programs can be linked to and address the needs of different stakeholders within the initial teacher education and early childhood education and care sectors, and how, once we have an understanding of those, the components of the programs could be mapped to needs to create a conceptual framework of what an ideal or a quality accelerated initial teacher education program would look like for early childhood education and care. So initial teacher education refers to entry-level qualifications that are undertaken by pre-service teachers prior to entering the teacher profession. They aim to provide graduates with the necessary skills, knowledge, experiences and dispositions that they need to prepare them for successful teaching at the educational level at which the program they're undertaking is aimed. So usually it would be primary, secondary or early childhood, or a combination of those. Broadly speaking, units within an ITE program include general education, specific curriculum and pedagogical content, as well as then field-based and supervised professional experience components, which change depending upon the focus of the program. The focus, duration and requirements of ITE programs do, though, change between countries quite significantly. In the Australian context, there's also significant variations in ITE program delivery between the states and territory. So the delivery, the duration, and the requirements are different between states and territories. That variation is really reflective of a complex interplay of the accreditation and approval requirements that universities need to meet within their ITE program offerings. So that includes a need to, or a lack of a need to, have a program meet requirements for teacher registration, which isn't a requirement for early childhood education and care programs in every state and territory. They need to meet the needs and preferences of pre-service teachers that the particular higher education institute is aiming to cater to, and those groups change within the states and territories as well. And they also need to adhere to a variety of higher education policies, so including areas such as equity and access for higher education students. Early childhood education and care focused ITE programs, so those that qualify graduates for teaching in prior to school education settings, currently, I suppose, exemplify that variety. They include both undergraduate and postgraduate programs. The duration of programs run from 6 months to 4 years. They may or may not lead to teacher registration. They may or may not qualify the graduate to only work in prior to school settings, maybe to work in prior to school and primary settings, and maybe for age groups from birth to 5, birth to 8, or birth to 12. So there's quite a lot of difference in those areas. The entry requirements to each program, how programs are delivered and who delivers them also varies quite significantly across the different ITE programs. Now, the early childhood sector. So early childhood education and care in Australia provides educational programs for children from birth through to the year before formal schooling, which is usually around about 5 years of age. It's a diverse and growing sector. There's just over 18,000 NQF approved services operating in Australia as of April this year. And there were over 1.4 million subsidised attendances in early childhood education and care services in the 3 months to September in 2024. The majority of Australia's early childhood services are operated by for-profit providers, so they make up 54% of the management types. And then we have a range of private, community, not-for-profit, government services that are managing the other 46% of these educational settings. Quality in the context of early childhood education and care has been a focus within the sector since the introduction of the Child Care Act in 1972, which was the first time they actually discussed quality in relation to education for children in prior to school settings. The National Quality Agenda placed further focus on quality in that context from its introduction in 2012. So it now provides regulatory direction, curriculum documentation, and baseline national quality standards that all NQF early years providers need to meet and that they're assessed and they're rated against. A key quality indicator that was introduced from 2013 under the NQF was that requirement for there to be degree qualified teachers in all early childhood education and care services. And that was focused around the delivery of a universal preschool program to all children for a minimum of 15 hours per week in the year before they enter formal schooling. Now, the link between highly qualified educators in early years settings and high quality outcomes for children is really clearly evident in the literature, as is the long and short-term benefits of access to high-quality early childhood education and care for the economy, for society, and for children themselves. So among some of those wider benefits, high-quality early childhood education and care is linked to well-being and educational outcomes for children through early years education into high school education, and then into post-secondary education as well. Some of the newer research makes links there. It's also linked to areas such as lowered rates of delinquency within communities. Economically, the early childhood sector is a key lever for parental workforce participation, and it's linked to a return on investment within literature of between $6 and $17 per every dollar of funding that's put in to the sector. Those benefits are a really key focus of quality early childhood education and care policy development within the Australian context, with a particular focus within that policy on the development of a professional, qualified and high quality early years workforce. So, accelerated ITE programs that qualify graduates as early childhood teachers for early childhood education and care are increasingly being offered by Australian universities. Of particular interest to this study are postgraduate teaching programs that qualify their graduates for teaching in under 2 years. So a master's degree hits 2, we're sort of looking at things that sit underneath that. The Graduate Diploma of Education Early Childhood is the primary area of focus in the study. So an initial mapping of a CEQA approved accelerated ITE programs, so those approved ECT qualifications for early childhood education and care, that I completed in late 24, early 25, identified 12 graduate diploma programs offered by Australian higher education institutes, primarily universities, and additional programs have been added to the approved program list since then, so it's a growing area. While there's some limited critical discussion of whether those short duration programs have the capacity to develop the skills needed for early childhood teachers for high quality teaching in the early years context, the reality is that these programs, these accelerated ITE programs, are a key figure within the initial teacher education sector. And in the Australian context, their removal is highly unlikely because we have so many challenges that we are facing in meeting the baseline needs for qualified early childhood teachers in early childhood education and care. So rather than adding to a deficit discourse around that area, in this study, I'm focusing on whether accelerated ITE may or may not be the best approach to achieving, or on whether or not accelerated ITE might be the best approach to meeting quality for early childhood education and care. I'm instead proposing that we take a critical consideration of those programs and focus on identifying whose needs are being met through the program. And then through building that understanding of whose needs they are meeting and mapping components of accelerated ITE to those needs, that we can develop a conceptual model to explain how the design, development and delivery of accelerated ITE can be strengthened towards ensuring that those needs are being met in a quality way through a sector-based, high-quality teaching lens. So that's the aim of what I'm doing. Thank you. So the question is, whose needs being met? So the latest early childhood education and care census data, which was released 10 days ago, shows that qualified early childhood teachers, so those who hold a bachelor degree or higher, make up just over 12% of the Australian early childhood education and care workforce. So there's a minor, I suppose, but moderate rise of 1% over the whole workforce since the last time we had census data released, which was in 2021. We've had teacher shortages within the workforce, and that's been an ongoing issue in the sector over that time. And that's resulted in a lot of early childhood services operating under approved exemptions. So those approved exemptions allow the services to continue operating without meeting baseline teacher requirements, basically. Because funding in preschool programs is linked to meeting that baseline teacher staffing requirement, those exemptions are really, really essential in early childhood education and care. Literally, those services could not operate unless there was an exemption in place. So what teaching exemptions are doing is filling a gap as such. We don't have enough teachers to run the programs that we're needing, and so we fill the gap with exemptions. Accelerated ITE has the potential to close that gap, so it could support the sector to quickly develop the teaching workforce that it needs in order to meet the baseline level of teachers that it requires. It also provides an opportunity to be able to accelerate the staffing of additional early years programs within new or existing early childhood services. So equitable access to high quality early childhood education and care across all Australian communities is a key government priority area. So families currently experience significant shortages of service in some areas, particularly in regional remote and rural communities. That negatively impacts upon parental workforce participation and on children accessing the benefits linked to early childhood education and care that is high quality. From a further quality perspective, opportunities to increase educator qualification levels within the workforce is also a key need. So recent media reports, and I think they've been really hard to miss, has really pointed out a lot of the quality concerns for wellbeing, safety, etc., even outside of education, for children in early childhood settings. So that's really heightened a focus on the need to ensure early years educators have the qualifications, skills and dispositions to provide safe, secure early childhood education and care based on relational pedagogies, which are all outcomes of ITE programs that are quality. Attracting staff to those programs and the sector overall is another priority area, and it requires individuals who are seeking out those higher qualification options to have options available to them that meet their needs and their preferences. So accelerated ITE programs really aligns with feedback from graduates and those in the early childhood workforce who are seeking to upgrade their qualifications. They're fast-tracked, they're cheaper, they don't require as much time away from work, and they allow for prior studying and non-teaching undergraduate qualifications to be recognised as a part of that qualification pathway as well. So those needs areas are primarily drawn from research that's not specifically focused on accelerated ITE and its needs analysis and benefits. It does, however, provide a case for ensuring that we focus on the growth of accelerated initial teacher education offerings within Australia. What we don't have, though, is data that specifically addresses or speaks to how those qualifications are or could or can meet those specific needs of our early childhood stakeholders and our ITE stakeholders as well. So the question then sort of becomes, whose needs could they be meeting that we don't understand yet, which is the next part of the study that I am working on. So I'm proposing a process of stakeholder engagement that seeks to understand issues and quality in relation to ITE and early childhood education and care, with a focus on collecting the voice of stakeholders in that space to understand how accelerated ITE could meet their needs and how those needs could be addressed through the lens of quality as it's understood by each of those stakeholder groups specifically. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Excellent. Well done. Thanks. Oh, we've got a question up the back. Great.
Hi. That was really interesting, thank you. My sort of question is around, you're talking about what's being missed, And I was wondering, you talked a lot about people who are already in the sector upgrading, and I think for that it's fantastic. But I was wondering if you think it's missing for anything for people that are not in the sector, because I used to be a study buddy back when that was a program, and I actually helped quite a few people who were doing the postgraduate courses. And the biggest thing I noticed, that probably my most asked question and issue was around a lot of particularly international students who, because they haven't come through the ranks like some of the early childhoods who build up doing their certificate 3s and they do the diplomas, they'd missed some of those things that you would most often learn in there of basic care, like how to hold a baby. So they're doing that, higher education thing, but it's those other skills that people who work up through the ranks learn that they didn't know that they were the most frightened of. So I was wondering if you think that there's something like that missed, because I for example had quite a few students that had actually come from China with the one-child policy, so they didn't have brothers and sisters or cousins, and some of them said, I've literally never met a baby in my life. So for them, going into their first prac was so scary because they just missed that. Whether you think that something like that might need to be incorporated into it for those students that aren't coming up through the ranks and learning another thing, but they're coming from another field and retraining.
Yeah. The answer is we don't actually know, really. That is the answer. There's no research in this space. So anecdotally speaking, and based on limited research, the reality is that most bachelor degrees are not meeting that requirement anyway. They're not qualifying teachers in quality ways to go and work in early childhood services. We've also got primary programs that are allowing teachers to teach in early childhood services when a primary curriculum delivery is significantly different to the way we deliver programs in early childhood services. So I think anecdotally, from what you're saying, if we discussed it with people who are delivering ITE programs who are supporting students, we might say, well, there's a gap, we're missing something in here. But we are in other programs as well. So rather than sort of talking about, well, they're a problem as such, let's talk about these are what we're needing. How can we address it by creating these robust programs that meet the needs of each group? I anticipate, but obviously I'm relying on the voices of those stakeholders that are not myself in this space. I anticipate that exactly what that looks like is going to be a consideration of component parts for different individuals coming into the program. What an international student needs who's new to Australia, who studied an engineering degree and wants to come into early childhood teaching is going to be quite different to an Australian domestic student who's completed even an undergraduate engineering degree and is wanting to come into early childhood teaching. So I think it's really about that. It's about understanding those needs to create more robust programs. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and I had another question, sorry.
Yeah.
Do you know if I've heard a lot of other students that are actually starting to panic in New South Wales because they've heard that NESA is no longer going to support those 1-year programs and it's going to need to be a 2-year program to be able to register as a teacher. Is that actually happening?
I think until it actually comes into place, we're not really going to know. So the teacher registration and accreditation requirements state to state are really, really different. And for a lot of registration bodies, the idea of registering early childhood teachers who only teach in private school settings it's almost a tack-on to the registration process. It was never the intention of the registration process. So I think as they work through what that looks like and as we refine what the programs look like, I think there's going to be some changes in that space. I don't know is the answer, but I think, you get rumours and everybody freaks out a little bit. So we wait and see what they do, yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Kelly? Okay, well, we might wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Well done.